It's really been an across-the-aisle issue. I mean, criminal justice reform has brought together unlikely allies even this year. You have the Koch brothers, the ACLU. So why this issue? Why now?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's an issue that touches everyone. You talk to people in urban areas and, their families are impacted. But then you talk to people in the suburbs and their families are impacted. People who have perhaps a daughter or a son who have stolen as a result of a drug habit or something along those lines. And so we've all, as a result of our overcriminalization in America, been touched by this issue in some way, whether it's a family or friend. And so I think that's sort of brought together the right and the left. I think budget crunches across the states have forced legislators to think through, are we really getting a return on investment for the people that we incarcerate? Are these sentences, not only are they disproportionate, but are they ineffective and expensive? Yes. And that's sort of forced the issue to the forefront as well. But I think, whether it's the right or the left, whether you've got the ACLU or Heritage or whoever it may be working on these issues, sitting side by side, which is so rare in today's political climate, we're really there for the same reasons, the same values. We may express them differently, but we have a shared value of, seeing people restored.
And Prison Fellowship really is trying to frame the conversation in terms of justice that restores. So what does that look like, especially when you have crimes of varying severity, petty theft versus murder versus drug use?
Right. Well, first and foremost, we believe in accountability. It's not a matter of whether we should punish for criminal acts, but how do we do that, how long, and what's the outcome? The outcome we really want to see is that victims are validated, but that also people who are responsible for crime are held accountable and then given opportunities to make amends, to earn back the public's trust, and then to go on and be hopefully reintegrated within society and to give back to their communities at their highest potential. We believe that no life is beyond hope and redemption. And we see some amazing stories across the country of people who have, perhaps made some really grave mistakes, but that God has redeemed that life just as He redeemed Chuck Colson's, and they've come out and given back to the community in such amazing ways.
So in the parable of the Good Samaritan, we see that God also cares deeply about victims of crime. So how can the church be engaged in caring for them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the Good Samaritan, I think that's really just a model, sort of a roadmap for the church in terms of victim care. We see that the Good Samaritan, did not just turn a blind eye like the others who passed on the road and saw this man who had been robbed before him. He said, he didn't say, "This is not my problem." He said, I'm going to bandage this man's wounds. I'm going to actually put him on my donkey, put him my own transportation, use my own money, take him to an inn, use my own resources. And, nowadays there are resources available to victims through the government, but sometimes that doesn't cut it. Oftentimes victims don't even report crimes. And so I think it's really important for us as the church to be on alert for people who share with us that they have been a victim of crime, and be on alert for people who might not be ready to say that they're a victim, and be ready to support them. We need to be there just like the Good Samaritan for their physical needs, their financial needs, and we need to be there for their emotional needs. I think one of the most important things we can do for victims is validate their experience, tell them, this is not okay that this happened to you, and help them through the criminal justice process, which can also often be lengthy, often be frustrating, and often victims don't get the outcomes that they want through that process. Often folks want answers to questions, why did you do this, and that sort of thing. And we are seeing, a sprinkling of restorative justice programs, which often provide an opportunity for victims as well as the person who's responsible for the crime against them to kind of come together and create a individualized plan for that person to make amends in a way that's meaningful to the victim. And some of those programs that have been successful have great feedback from the victims in terms of their personal satisfaction out of that process compared to the traditional criminal justice process.
If you could name one policy that you think has been particularly effective in sort of lowering recidivism or deterring crime, what would you say that was?
I would say a very generic answer in terms of lengthy incarceration. You know, in the 1980s, as Chuck Colson was just sort of beginning to blaze this path, and no one was hearing it at the time, you know, a lot of legislators across the country were building prisons. They were lengthening sentences. They were using mandatory minimums, and not really thinking through, you know, what really does this crime merit in terms of proportion, but how can we show that we're tough on crime. And I think that as a result, we now have, you know, America as the world's leading jailer. We are at a point where every family and community is impacted by this. And I think that lengthy sentences have, you know, definitely made some dents, I think, in crime rates, but they've had diminishing returns, and those returns have incredibly grave impact on our communities. And a recent study from the National Associated Press talks about how it's actually swift and certain sanctions that are far more important than the length of incarceration. I think sometimes we tend to believe, and, you know, I'm an attorney, and I think a lot of times we think, you know, people really must think through and be very rational about these choices they make, and if they know they're going to get a 7-year sentence instead of a 5, like, they're going to think twice. But the reality is, it's really about whether or not people think they're going to get caught. And if they don't, the benefit or reward of whatever the activity is they're engaging in often outweighs the supposed consequence. And so it's just really important that we have good law enforcement practices, and that we're actually enforcing the law and providing a swift and certain sanction to someone, versus, you know, let's think through how long we're incarcerating someone. The length of incarceration can have an impact on that person's ability to come back to the community and really reintegrate. So let's make sure we're giving someone what is a just and proportionate sentence, or utilizing alternatives to incarceration where possible.
Language can have an important role in changing the culture. So how can we change our language in the way that we talk about criminal justice or those who are in the system?
Great question. We talk about this a lot at Prison Fellowship, and we say one of the number one things you can do in terms of changing culture is changing your language. I think change language over time makes a big impact. We see that across a lot of movements in our country over time. And so I would just encourage people to think through the language they use in particular about people who have committed crimes. Ex-con, you know, ex-offender, offender. These words carry a lot of stigma to them, and from a biblical perspective, we believe, you know, they tend to emphasize the person's circumstance or sin first, rather than their identity in Christ first, and then their circumstance or sin second. And so we really try and talk about men and women behind bars, or people responsible for crime. You know, not trying to err away from the accountability that is owed to the action, but always remembering people as, you know, children of God first.
Right. And when someone is behind bars, how do you think that we can promote a more constructive culture that will promote real transformation?
Great question. Yeah, I think constructive culture in prison is all about promoting the norms and values that we actually want people to display outside of prison. Often, you know, we have a lot of TV shows about prison, and most of those, if not all of them, do not reflect the types of behavior and norms we would like to see people displaying when they're released. And so, you know, we do have a program through Prison Fellowship that we've launched called the Warden's Exchange, which trains wardens across the country on you know, how to promote moral rehabilitation in their prisons. And it's all about modeling behaviors and values, you know, themselves and with their staff, so that, you know, those who are in prison will adopt those. And I think we as the church, as we're visiting, can do the same thing. You know, and I think giving prisoners access to programming, opportunities to make amends. There's some amazing programs, for example, training seeing eye dogs for people who are handicapped on the outside. Prisoners do that on the inside and are able to give back to their communities while they're in prison. It's that sort of thing that really promotes a constructive culture about you know, making amends and giving back to the community, earning back the public's trust while you're in, that I think can be really valuable in terms of making sure people return to our communities as good neighbors.